Recently, a tech YouTuber that I follow had an interesting take on an American classic, The Breakfast Club. This made me think to myself, was this movie ever actually good?
I hate you. Yeah? Good.
Then I assume Alice and I are better people than you.
I do remember enjoying The Breakfast Club, but I respect a lot of this guy's other opinions, so maybe he has a point. And at the very least, it should make for a clickable YouTube video. So I rewatched The Breakfast Club for the first time in years, with one question in mind. Was this movie actually good? And I won't lie to you, I like to hate on generally popular things just because it gives me a nice feeling of intellectual superiority. Check out my Marvel series if you want to see more of that. So I was half expecting and definitely hoping to agree with Linus's take on this. And I went in starting to write titles based on just that concept very early. But I came out of my viewing with some more mixed feelings than I expected. After all, it had a lot of things that I generally like. It had good, interesting characters that I emotionally connected with.
Keep eating your hand, you're not going to be hungry for lunch. I've seen you before.
With archetypes in a good and hyper-realist way. It also provides something that seems like social commentary, even if that bit is a little bit shallow, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit.
You see us as you want to see us. In the simplest terms, with the most convenient definitions.
It does, however, have some pretty big flaws that I think are often overlooked, even if you chalk the Judd Nelson, Molly Ringwald stuff as a product of its time. So let's get into it. And I'm going to start with the things I didn't care for. Starting off very early, every character in this movie in the beginning is extremely annoying. Almost immediately, I'm cringing watching the interactions of the characters on screen. And there are a few reasons I imagine for this. One is simply bad writing, which I definitely think is a part of it. I can also concede that on some level, this may have been intentional. The whole point of the early part of this movie is that all of the kids are trying to put on masks to fit into the stereotypes of what they think other people want out of them. This is something I noticed years ago when I first watched the movie. And then I was even closer to the age of the characters. You would think I'd relate to them more, but still I find them annoying and poorly written in the first bit of this movie. And when your first impression of a movie is a sequence that makes you hate every character...
Hey, what? If I lose my temper, you're totaled, man.
That kind of characterizes the rest of your viewing experience. Second is the pacing. With a runtime that barely cracks 90 minutes, I was amazed at how slow this movie felt, especially early on, which is not generally the time you want to slow down your movie for long pauses and boring conversation. I understand that this is supposed to simulate the feeling of detention of the boredom of the students, and I get that I found it so excruciating because of the brain rot of the internet. I've learned that if I don't make everything that's happening this 30 seconds very interesting, all of you will immediately swipe away. But I still think saying that I was bored for the first 30 minutes of a 90-minute film is a perfectly fair criticism. And then there is the teacher. It's not just this character's disposition and generally unlikable character traits that make me hate him.
But someday, man, someday, when you're out of here and you've forgotten all about this place and they've forgotten all about you and you're wrapped up in your own pathetic life, I'm gonna be there. That's right. And I'm gonna kick the living shit out of you, man. I'm gonna knock your dick in the dirt.
It's rather the constant, bewildering actions he takes, like deciding to sit in the office across the hall, or basically bending to every John Bender will as long as John Bender's antagonizing him. And I have no love for John Bender, which I'll address in just a second, but he's at his best when he's interacting with the teacher. He manages to get everything he wants out of him, and it's all because this teacher acts like he's never had an interaction with a delinquent high school student. Slapping John Bender with detentions and screaming at him is like soothing a toddler who barely sits down on the ground and cries like they fell off a 2-story building. All you're doing is reinforcing this behavior for the future. Anyway, the teacher's actions make no sense. I get that he's supposed to represent kind of all adults in their lives, but to me he represents 0 adults because he doesn't act like a human being. I mean, he leaves 5 students alone in a room with a door that won't stay open just so that he can go sit in his office away from them. It makes no sense. He's simply used as a plot device, and I find that incredibly irritating. And this brings me to the next irritating character that doesn't act like a human being, John Bender. This low-life high school bad boy who's looked down upon by all the preppy kids likes to frame his unkind, rude, and obnoxious behavior as just being honest.
What would you be doing if you weren't out making yourself a better citizen?
Why do you have to insult everybody?
I'm being honest, asshole.
And this is one of the most irritating traits that a person can have. And I speak with some authority here because I've said things exactly to that effect when I was younger. And it's not just because he's being rude that makes this obnoxious. This kind of phrase is exactly what people do when they're trying to use the truth to lie. John Bender might be making a genuine observation, but even if he is, he's not using it in a genuine hope that you might better yourself because of his observation. He's doing it to hurt you and to pick apart at your insecurities. He's trying to find the most effective way to hurt you. And again, I speak with some authority on the matter. John Bender's cynical worldview, though it's well earned, is not a productive way to go through life. And a big part of the problem with this movie is that Bender kind of wins. His actions lead the group to be more authentically themselves. And the truth about Bender isn't that he's telling some unspoken truths in an honest effort to make people better themselves. It's that he's an abused, scared little kid who's using that abuse as an excuse to hurt other people. And a cigar burn on your arm doesn't make those actions acceptable or tolerable. In conclusion, John Bender is an obnoxious, egomaniacal asshole, and painting him as the winner or the hero of this movie was a bad decision. Next, the social commentary. A major part of the theme of this movie is about stereotype, and how forcing yourself into these boxes that people put out for you is harmful and constricting.
You see us as a brain, an athlete, a basket case, a princess, and a criminal.
I get the point that they're trying to make here, and this kind of criticism of society seems to be increasingly commonplace, but I think it's kind of a lazy criticism. Yes, putting people in boxes can be harmful, and it's unfair to judge people based on the way that you think they should act. This fails to realize that human beings put people in boxes for a reason. And in high school, these feel incredibly constricting because everyone's trying to break free from the boxes that their parents built them in. But if society doesn't put people in boxes, we can't do a basic assessment as to whether somebody's a threat or not. Everyone living outside the box means an entire society full of John Benders. And John Bender is dangerous. At one point, he literally threatens Andrew with a switchblade. My point being that without certain social boxes or quote-unquote normal behavior, constricting as it might be, we would have to be on guard all the time. And we have no way of deciphering who might be dangerous or what might be dangerous for that matter. Now, I did have some things that I liked about this movie, but I want to cover one more major gripe before I get to that. The ending. As I already alluded to, in the end of this movie, John Bender wins. And we get this iconic fist up in the air celebration. He manages to get Claire, which has a whole host of other problems. I mean, the idea that you could actually assault a woman and then she'd agree to date you is pretty unsettling as it is, not to mention the fact that Judd Nelson was 8 years older than 16-year-old Molly Ringwald when this was shot. But this video isn't about that. We can all just agree that that's bad and move on. What I don't like about the victory of John Bender is it fails to give him any arc. It excuses the way he acts because he managed to get the others to drop the show they were putting on and be more themselves. But Bender was the worst of them all. He was constantly putting on a show to aggravate everyone else in the room.
Oh, I know. I feel all empty inside because of it. I have such a deep admiration for guys who roll around on the floor with other guys.
You'd never miss it.
It feels like the moral of this story is that we should all be more like John Bender, which is just not right. We should all be more ourselves, but we have to understand that ourselves have to be negotiated within a society so that humanity can function as a unit. And being John Bender is not conducive to society functioning as a unit.
Ponder the error of your ways.
That would make us all useless lone wolves who are constantly pushing boundaries just to see what they can get away with. And again, this is not a productive way to go about life. So what did I like about this movie? First, I like the chase sequence. This fun little bit where they're all running around the halls trying to beat Vernon back to the library is really funny and Scooby-Doo, and it was done in the 80s before it had been done a million times. I liked it. The soundtrack in this movie is also pretty fantastic. It's an iconic soundtrack that still holds up to a rewatch. The scene where everyone cuts loose and smokes weed together is also one of my favorites. It's kind of the most iconic scene in this movie. I think it should at least be the most iconic scene in this movie. It feels like an authentic high school experience, and it's a good turning point for the movie. And the big one is the emotional scene where we get a genuine look at the trauma from all the characters. I think this scene is well done. It's really well acted. The writing is believable, and it feels like this climactic moment that you have in high school where you all get over the trauma that whatever screwed you up on the way here. And I like the scene where that directly follows this, where they all dance. It feels like they've unburdened unburden themselves, and they're actually allowed to be themselves and do whatever they like at this point. And that's the point of finding a real group of friends. The reason that high school friendships often don't last is because when you're around them, you're not you. You're whoever you think they want you to be. And that's just not a good way to live your life. And you get over that as you get older and you decide you can be yourself a little bit more. But I think this is really the movie's strong point. The problem with the movie is this part only lasts about 30 minutes. The strong point of the movie could fit inside a normal half hour of television. But enough bashing. I actually do like this part of the movie. And I think it's the reason that people, especially people in their teens, really resonate with this movie. And it's a reason that it hangs on as a classic. So was The Breakfast Club really a good movie? Or does it just connect with us because we have a fondness for a coming of age story and most people watched it when they were 17? I think with the sheer number of dislikes I had versus likes, it comes across that I didn't like this movie. And that's kinda true, but it's also kinda not. Like I said, I have pretty mixed feelings about the movie. I found it entertaining. I genuinely enjoyed my rewatch, at least after about minute 35. I just thought there were some major flaws that needed some airing out. So let's give the movie a score and see if it's really worth that kind of iconic grading that it gets. Starting with the plot, this movie has kind of an unconventional plot. The characters are up against themselves, and in some ways this really works, but the pacing of the movie is really bad, and most of the major plot developments happen in one scene. It gets a 3 out of 10. The characters are definitely the strongest point of this movie. Most of them have significant arcs, and I genuinely found myself invested in them, even the ones that I didn't like. I don't think there's anything spectacular about any of the character arcs, but a 7 out of 10 seems fair. I don't really have anything to say about the cinematography. There's no obvious mistakes. It was fine. 5 out of 10. The writing really is not up to the standard of what I expect out of a good movie. I found that the characters didn't talk like human beings in a lot of cases, and the writing feels jarring. I really hate it when I'm watching a movie and I have to think to myself, would a person ever actually say that? It does get better as the movie goes on, which makes me wonder if some of that in the beginning of the movie was intentional, but I don't really care. It was off-putting, and I didn't find it to be an appealing way to further the plot. I'll give it a 4 out of 10. I've already talked a fair bit about my thoughts of the theme of this movie, and though in some places I'm not a fan of it, I do like it in others. A story about a group of teens overcoming their social baggage and being more themselves has some solid messages for young people, and that's cool, and the theme is coherent, and it resolves itself within the space of the movie, so I'll give it a 6 out of 10 because that's better than a lot of movies can do. Again, check out the Marvel series. So, all totaled up, The Breakfast Club gets a 5 out of 10. So, the answer to the question, was this movie ever good? No, not really. But it wasn't that bad either. It was right down the middle, just a fine movie. It doesn't deserve all the praise it gets, but it's still an entertaining movie, and if you're middle school age or maybe a little older, it's probably still a really great watch. It's kind of a family-friendly movie, also kind of not in some spots. I think it spoke to a specific demographic and did that extremely well, which is why most people have fond memories of watching The Breakfast Club, but it is overrated, and it doesn't live up to the hype if you're over the age of 19. Anyway, if you made it this far in the video, hit like and subscribe. I want to get to 10,000 subscribers in the year 2025, so don't miss any of my new videos. I'm going to try to be posting at least weekly in 2025, and check out my latest video on the best movie from Quentin Tarantino.